Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about what's called conditional or branching statements, specifically how to use if and if else. So when we talk about input, where we ended up is that we said the user, whenever we allow user to type in something, there's a possibility that they type in something that we don't expect. So for example, in this program that we wrote, where we asked the user for the side of a square, the user can type in a negative number. And a square with a side that's of negative length really doesn't make any sense. So we want to be able to catch that and tell the user about it. So really, kind of in English, what we want to do is something like if side is negative, we display a message to the user saying, hey, it's wrong. And guess what? We can easily translate this English sentence into Python. And the way we write it is after we get the side from the user, we say if side is less than 0, which means it's negative, we tell the user side should not be negative. Okay, so let's look at these two lines of code more closely. So we start with if, which is a keyword that tells Python, I'm going to start writing a conditional statement. After if, this is a condition. The condition must be either true or false. And in this case, the condition is that is the sign less than 0. This is the less than sign. Okay, so we're checking if the sign is less than 0. And this is followed by the colon, which is kind of a mandatory thing here. It signals to Python that this is the end of condition and the beginning of the body of the code that will be executed if the condition is true. Okay, hopefully you get all that. And if not, you can check the slides or listen to it again. Okay, now one thing I have to emphasize, and this is very important, that this is the first time that we see a block of code, which in this case is just a print statement. This block of code is indented. It is indented. Okay, so this just defines an action to be taken if and only if the condition is true. Now, whenever you indent something in Python, it should be consistent, the amount of indentation. And the default in PyCharm is 4 spaces, no tabs, no tab characters, just 4 spaces. And so everywhere you indent, you should use 4 spaces, every level of indentation. That's very, very important. Okay. So just as kind of a formal definition, the if construct is called conditional statements. And it is very useful for doing something different depending on whatever that condition might be. Okay, so now that we added 2 lines of code, we should test it and see if it works. Something very important is if you fix something after you fix it, you have to check that if you put in the original input the original behavior is still there. So in this case, when I put in 5, which is not an error, it's not a wrong number, so the parameter is still calculated properly. Okay, now we should run it again. And now we put in the thing that was wrong and is something that we're trying to fix. That's -5. We press enter. Okay, so this is good as expected. Our program is telling us now that the size should now be negative. However, it still goes on to calculate the perimeter. And the reason is that even though this condition is true, and when that is true, this line of code inside that condition is executed. After this line of code, what Python does is it just goes on to calculate, to execute the next line, and the line after that, and so on. So that's why we see that even though the program knows the size is a bad number, there's nothing here to tell it not to go on. Okay, so we have to fix it such that if the size is negative, not only we tell the user that it's wrong, but we also should not calculate the perimeter. And there are multiple ways to do this. I can think of at least 2. Okay, the first way is to use, or rather, the first way is to terminate the program immediately if we know that the size is negative. And the way to do that is we'll use a this is something new. We'll use what's called a system function, a system exit 1. Okay, what this system.exit1 does is it exits the program immediately. So nothing is executed after this line of code. Now you notice it's the sys is has a red wiggly underline, and that is because I have to import the system library. Okay, so once I import it, you notice the red wiggly line is gone. And don't worry too much about what this actually means right now. Just know that in order to exit the program, you have to use sys.exit. And in order to use sys.exit, you have to import sys. Okay? So let me run this, make sure it works. So now if we say -5, our program tells us that the size should not be negative, and then it exits. So it no longer goes on and tries to execute the following lines. Now, one thing about sys.exit and this thing is very important, is that exiting a program is generally a very, very bad way to handle the user error. It really should not be used. Right? What you normally should do is you tell the user something is wrong and give the user another chance to get it right. So killing the program is really not good. However, it is okay for this week. The reason is that we don't know a whole lot of other ways of doing flow control just yet. So this is acceptable for now. Okay, and just one more thing, that when I say exit 1 here, that number is actually reflected in the exit code. Now the exit code is 1 rather than the 0 that we usually see. Okay, anyway, so that's approach number 1 of not calculating the perimeter when the size is a bad number. Okay, what is approach number 2? Well, so approach number 2, if we want to say it in English, is something like, if side is negative, we tell the user that it's a bad number. Otherwise, we will calculate the perimeter. And as it turns out, there's an equivalent of otherwise in Python, or actually it's also kind of in English, and that is using else. So let me restore the original code. I'm going to get rid of the sys exit. So I'm going to say, okay, else. So if side is negative, I print side is bad. Side should not be negative. Else, I will do this, which is to calculate the perimeter. So what this really means is that if this condition is true, right, what's inside the body for this condition gets executed. If this condition is false, then what's in the else body gets executed. So let's see if that still works. So again, we should start with something that used to work and make sure it still works. So when we type in 5, 5 is not less than 0, so this would be false. And when this statement is false, when this condition is false, this should get executed. So let's make sure when we enter 5, there, we did calculate the perimeter for the square. Okay, now let's run it again. Now let's put in a negative number, -5. So psi should be -5, and -5 is less than 0, so this condition is true, in which case only this print statement should be executed. So let's press enter, and there, it tells us psi should not be negative. And it doesn't go on to do the work of calculating the perimeter. Just want to mention about the indentation here again. So we have 2 blocks of code that is indented. Right? One is when the condition is true, the other is else when the condition is false. The indentation of both blocks should be consistent. They should be the same. Okay, so in this case, it's 4 spaces for each of the block of code. So just to show you what not to do, I believe you actually can indent the 2 blocks differently. Sorry. Yeah, you can indent the 2 blocks differently. So in this block, I indented with 3 spaces, and in this block, I indented with 4. While Python allows you to do that, don't do it. They should all be indented with 4. Now, within the same block, Python would not allow you to indent differently. Well, okay. It shows the error at the end of this line. So if I actually move this around, then Python won't be happy. So it won't allow you to indent differently within the same block. But between different blocks, it allows you to do that, but don't do it. Now I want you to try to do this in the program that you've written before. So remember that you wrote a program that asks the user for the width and length of a rectangle. You calculate the perimeter. So now you should add the code to make sure both width and length are not negative. And again, if either one of them is negative, you can exit right away. But just remember, you should only do this for this week.